but it's just knowing yourself and knowing what your threshold is for basically dealing with problems. Because I can promise you, anything with a higher return will come with its own set of problems.
Welcome. This is the Hot Real Estate Investing Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping others through real estate investing. Our hosts interview guests from all aspects of real estate investing who generously share valuable experiences and advice. Whether you're starting out or an experienced investor, this is the show for you.
Hello and how's it going? Welcome to the Hot Real Estate Investing Podcast, where I interview guests who want to help others investing in real estate. We keep these podcasts fun and full of value, and I'm really excited to share with you guys my guest today, David Fitzgerald. He is a self-employed residential appraiser and long-term real estate investor and entrepreneur. David, welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
For the audience out there that doesn't know you quite yet, David, can you share with them your 30-second elevator pitch, a little bit about yourself and your focus in real estate?
Yeah, sure. I started out pretty early, to be honest. I had real estate goals since I was like 14, but
That's awesome.
I was going to ASU, bought a house near campus. Back in college, I house hacked it, so I rented out all the bedrooms. And that slowly led me to finishing out the degree there. And after I graduated, I still didn't know what I wanted to do at all. I knew I liked houses. I'm like, okay, I like houses. Architecture seems like a pain. I'm not smart enough to get into that. I'm like a BC student. And I kind of stumbled across appraising. And I talked to an appraiser. And I asked them what the day was like. And it was like, what's your day like? And once I heard about it, I was like, okay, this is it. So I just jumped in, and doing appraising obviously was a nice leg up into real estate, looking at values every single day. After a few years, I think I was 25. At that point, I bought a couple properties in Casa Grande just because the market was a little bit cheaper entry point. And then from there, bought an investment in Glendale, and now I'm up in North Phoenix, and I turned my original house hack, the Tempe house, into a long-term rental. And so, obviously a lot happened in between those years, but sure. I would say just time, time in the market definitely helped me out there. And then just, I guess here we are years later, and I can actually have a portfolio to
talk about, right? And
yeah.
That's why we buy real estate and wait, because I think that the time value of money in real estate is always going to ultimately end up positive. And really excited to talk about something unique today on this episode with David, and that's rental arbitrage, and specifically from the rental and the investor that actually owns the properties perspective. But David, we always start these shows off with some motivation, and so can you share your motivational quote that you brought with you today?
Sure. So this comes from my dad, actually. I don't know if he got it from anywhere. I've tried looking up if he did. I couldn't find it. But the quote is, shoot for the stars, land on the moon. And a lot of people think I'm trying to say like, oh, it's that saying where you, like if you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you land amongst the stars. It's not that.
Yeah.
So basically what that means is, set really high goals, because stars are really, really far away, right? So shoot for the stars. And if all you get to is the moon, it's like you barely make it out of orbit. You land on the moon and you're like, man, I didn't meet my goal. Well, the view's pretty dang good from the moon. So,
you're still on the moon, right?
So that would be my quote. And I got that from my dad.
I love that. That's awesome. One, because it's from your dad, but two, because it's a cool twist on like you said, kind of a common one that you hear.
Right.
But I really like that, because I think so much of us, if the who not how, that you see how far, you don't ever look how far you actually went. You're just upset you didn't get to the stars, but hey, you landed on the moon. You did pretty good.
Right. You didn't make, even if you don't make your goal, if you make progress, it's like, well, the view's pretty good from there. So
No, that's great. So transitioning into our main topic, David, how can you help our audience of real estate investors? Maybe a little bit more about your background or just about the rental arbitrage specific property so we can kind of dive into that.
Yeah, so my wife and I, we have 5 long-term rentals. One of those is in Glendale, near the football stadium. And my original intention was to buy that, remodel it, furnish it, and then I would run it as an Airbnb. As I got closer and closer to actually, filling the house with furniture, I thought more and more about, okay, I'm investing in real estate because I enjoy it. I want to build long-term wealth, obviously, but I do it mostly because I enjoy the process, right? And I didn't want to give that part up, and I didn't want to get into the hospitality business. I like real estate, not hospitality, and I think as I got closer, I realized that. So because it was just prime location for an Airbnb though, and it had no HOA, that was all clear. I specifically advertised it, in the listing saying like open to rental arbitrage. And I knew going into it, market rent was about $2,300 a month. I had someone offer me $2,500. So just like 10% above market, nothing crazy. But, I gave them a 2-year lease. I let them run an Airbnb out of it, 2-year lease so that they can actually get some headway and, get furniture and have a not long enough ramp, I guess you would say, or runway to actually get some income going. And I like that model, honestly, because if you have the right property for it, like obviously not every property, like my Casa Grande properties, probably wouldn't be great to do that with. But, in my eyes, I like it almost better just because you have cleaners going in there every single week, cleaning the place up.
Sure.
You're working with business people, so they're a little bit more responsive. They, obviously I'm still in charge of or handle major items like if appliances went out, stuff like that.
Sure.
But they handle all the little stuff. And for me, it's just a great model because I can stick to what I enjoy doing, which is deal finding. I enjoy just like setting up the long-term tenants and then running those kind of in the background. And then I can kind of focus what I really enjoy, which is appraising, getting the next deal, So,
Sure.
And that's why I generally like it.
Yeah, no, I mean, just fascinating because like we talked a little bit before, I'm always running into real estate investors that are looking for opportunities to perform rental arbitrage on existing rentals or opportunities like that. But you went into this, like, as soon as you flipped it, let's say, and like you had that property ready to be rented, was there a moment in time that you kind of realized that about yourself? Because I love the fact that you stayed in your own lane. So many of us get that shiny object syndrome, right? And say, oh, I'll be an Airbnb and host, and then I got to become a super host, and I have to do all these things and have communication all day and all night, or I have to create another business and sub that out to VAs or other people. And you said, no, I'm gonna go and did you try to rent it out like traditionally and you couldn't get a renter, or like right when you flipped it and you started to say, like you said, buying furniture, you were like, no, I'm gonna look for this opportunity to get more value out of the asset?
Yeah, so from the get-go, from when the first time I listed it, it was with the intention of rental arbitrage, letting someone take over that role. And I even considered, having a property manager run the Airbnb for me. And, typically they take like 25%. And I just decided, in real estate or just maybe in life in general, getting the max amount of return out of every single piece of real estate or out of every single piece of investment. One, it comes with more risk, obviously. And then two, it always comes with more work. And that's something I think a lot of people forget about is if you're running an Airbnb, well, that's kind of like having a part-time job in hospitality. And it's not always easy.
Absolutely.
And I just, I think a big thing is knowing yourself and, what you would actually enjoy doing in the long term. could I stomach it for maybe a year? Probably. And
Sure.
I could definitely make a better return. That said, it I don't know. It's more about the journey, I would say. And it's like, I want to stay in the game for a long time rather than getting burnt out on like if, for instance, if I ran the Airbnb and I didn't hit the numbers I wanted to see, or I hit a lot of
Sure.
stress, that might impede my future growth, as far as like staying motivated, because, staying motivated, obviously, to keep investing when you don't see immediate returns all the time,
It's tough.
it can be tough. So, I think it's important to just acknowledge what you know about yourself. And it's like, okay, there's an ideal situation, and then there's what's a situation I would actually do. What would I
Sure.
actually do in a, because only you know yourself the best typically. So.
But in reality, I mean, you're looking at an asset, like you said, it was probably going to get you $2,300 a month.
Right.
And then you're automatically able to get $2,500 a month and really do nothing else. There's really nothing else as far as a landlord that you had to do special for rental arbitrage as opposed to a regular rental. Plus, as you mentioned, you got a 2-year lease, which is not that common. I mean, honestly, I feel like most people still probably 80-20 or 1-year leases. So you got 2 times the lease amount. I mean, is that pretty standard, that 10% over fair market value? Is that kind of, did you do some research on that, or were there other people with rentals out there with kind of that same justification of rent?
To be honest, I had it listed at 23, and I had a lot of people offering more for different things like group homes, which obviously I didn't want to get into. I mean, that's another thing that some people are getting into now these days. I've seen it more, because I see a lot of properties every single week, and I talk to investors just being an appraiser. And, but anyways, it's I had it listed, and I had a lot of people offering me more money per month. And it was just, these people came up and that was their offer of $2,500. And from what I've seen, it's because here's the thing, I didn't furnish the property at all. So they furnished it. So I don't know if I could get much more than that. And I could see people getting a higher percentage over market if they furnished it. But then you kind of get into the weeds a little bit there, because if, chair breaks, something like that.
You're still dealing with some day-to-day
I wouldn't
stuff.
want to be responsible for that little stuff, And so
it's really nice.
If you're just renting out your house, I think even if you just got market rent, I wouldn't be opposed to it. If they offered me market and they said, hey, we want to run an Airbnb, and I know it's getting cleaned every single week, and because most Airbnbs,
like you said, it's getting cleaned, and they have to be at a certain level of cleanliness and niceness
for them
to get rented. So I mean, I never thought about it like that. And, I don't think a lot of other investors, you might be out there looking at a long-term rental thinking, oh, I can only cash flow $200 a month, but maybe you can get double or triple that by renting it to someone who wants to arbitrage it. And it's really creative, I think. And it's looking for the best value for that particular asset or property. And I don't think we always do that, right? You got to sometimes take a step back. And I did that on one of my long-term rentals that we recently turned into a short-term rental ourselves. But to your point, I don't love the hospitality business. If I didn't have my wife that manages that, I could not do the hospitality and the communication and all the things that go into being a super host like my wife is. So it's really great that you knew where your focus was and where your superpowers are and where you wanted to stay. Because I could see trouble the other way. Had I become the host, or had you become the host, we're probably not the super hosting type,
right? It's just always, I think the takeaway here is that, yes, there's almost always a better way to get a better return out of each property. You can rent properties out by the bedroom. If you're near especially college town, you can rent to group homes or halfway houses. I mean, there's a lot of different options, but it's just knowing yourself and knowing what your threshold is for basically dealing with problems. Because I can promise you, anything with a higher return will come with its own set of problems. I mean,
Sure.
even long-term rental, I could easily stick money into the S&P 500 or into the general market and make 9-10%. Long-term rental, a little bit more work, obviously, but hopefully I get a better return on my money. So it's always just a trade-off. It's like, how many problems are you willing to deal with? And that'll tell you what kind of return you can probably get.
High risk, high return, right?
Yeah.
So are you looking to do this in other properties? Like, I mean, you mentioned your Casa Grande, maybe not the right fit, but like, are you out there as you're actively looking to buy your next property or turn another property? Are you looking for particularly others to rental arbitrage, or you're just looking for good assets that work one way or the other, and if it works for a long-term rental, it pencils that way, you're good, but hey, if it maybe can be a rental arbitrage, hey, even better, I get 10% on top of it?
Yeah, I would never. So when I look at deals, I always look at how it would perform under a normal long-term rental,
okay.
Assuming a family rents it, something like that, just because you can't always expect, you might go, because if you run numbers, for instance, thinking you're going to get 10-15% above market rates. Well, and then what happens when no one wants to, go into the rental arbitrage business on the other side? Because, maybe, I mean, we're seeing this in Phoenix, there's definitely quite a few Airbnbs that popped up in the past few years, and depending on who you talk to, they're talking about how their occupancy rates have gone down recently.
For sure.
And, so you always run that risk. So, I think at least when I search for a deal, I mostly make sure I don't get burned. And if there's an upside on the other end, or I find someone who's willing to pay a bit more to run an Airbnb, that's just a bonus, on top. But yeah, I don't think I would ever look for a property specifically for that purpose. Yeah.
So what would you tell someone that maybe some pros or some considerations before, like, let's say they have a long-term rental that's coming up. Are there any negatives about this? Like, you've talked about it very, very positively and haven't really mentioned any negatives. What are the negatives that you're incurring right now, or that you might warn somebody that is moving into this space as the actual owner of the asset or property?
There's definitely some negatives and potential risks, like not as much, I don't think, if you were running it. But let's say you allow them to rental arbitrage it, and then a city code comes in and says, like, hey, we're limiting. So you're still subject to all those risks. If CC&Rs change,
stuff,
if you're in an HOA, obviously that's a higher risk, because they can just say, like, hey, can't do it anymore. And then, what do you do from there? And then I would say for instance, in Glendale, they recently, because the Super Bowl was here, they recently passed a thing where you have to register your Airbnbs, HOA or not, in their system. And that's basically so that they can, get the tax money
extra tax.
Extra tax money for that. And I had to create an account when that came out. And that happened after I had my deal in place. Okay. So I wasn't expecting that, but I had to make an account, and then I had to have my tenant go on the account and basically assume. Now they obviously are assuming the tax bill for that, because they're the ones running it as an Airbnb, making hopefully profit on that. And but it's just things come up, and I would say it's impossible to be prepared for everything. For instance, I wasn't expecting that, but it can be a slight hassle as far as dealing with city stuff. I would say that's your biggest downside.
And that's
is just
still
dealing
such
with city code and
moving like space in every short-term rental market. Like,
right.
Yeah, just things you can't really foresee in the short-term rental game. I mean, are you going to do this again? Like when the lease is up, if you can, are you going to re-sign up for rental arbitrage? Is that the plan?
Yeah. So, the two properties that I have that probably work best for that setup is I have one in Tempe and then, kind of near ASU, and then the Glendale property. And to be honest, I recently rented out the Tempe property, and I also tried the same thing, in the header, open a renting for rental arbitrage, but this was in December. And so, I was advertising in the, right after basically Airbnb peaked. So a lot of people were not looking to start new business ventures. Occupancy rates were kind of going down in Tempe. And, I just didn't see any action on that side of things. So, I found a long-term renter and it worked out either way. So I definitely always try just because, at least in my head, as far as the property is concerned, I think it probably stays in better condition than, if you have a family in there versus running it as an Airbnb. And of course, you have your property set up for it. Like, I don't have carpet in those two properties. Sure. It's all like LVP, luxury vinyl plank or tile, and there's just not a whole lot to mess up. A lot of people get worried, I think, that, oh, what happens if there's a big rager at my house or, a big party? Sure. And, when it comes to that stuff, all you can do is bulletproof your house to a point.
Because that can happen in a long-term rental.
That can happen in a long-term rental. And worst case scenario, I mean, even if, if you had to repaint or touch up some drywall, I mean, this is cheap stuff, in the grand scheme of things. So, just keeping things in perspective as far as like, what things actually cost to repair. If you have to touch up some paint or some drywall, probably not the biggest of deals,
Yeah. I always think about multiple exit strategies or multiple options for a property. And like, this was one that really wasn't in my, thought process before, but certainly moving forward, I think it's something that all investors out there can consider with their rentals. I have a couple that, I still have one long-term rental, and, it's over by the new, chip plant up in North Phoenix. And that would be a really good, I've looked at like midterm rentals and there's a lot of contractors coming in, and, I've thought about potentially transitioning that one. It probably works a little bit better as a midterm rental than a short-term rental, but same thing, that rental arbitrage might be a happy medium to say, hey, I don't have to do the hosting, but it might work for that. So I really like that as a different option for a lot of real estate investors out there as you're looking for what's the best use or best return on my time. So not only the best, return on your investment, but also the best return on your time. I think this is such a doable investment strategy that I don't think a lot of people are probably considering.
Hi, my name is Chris Hallam of Simplicity Lending Group and powered by Nexa Mortgage. I'm a trusted and experienced loan officer who will work with you to find the best mortgage options for your needs. From first-time homebuyers to experienced investors, I have a wide variety of loan options and competitive rates, which makes me the perfect choice for those who are in need of creative financing. Contact me today and take the first step towards financial stability.
Are you ready for the hot seat?
All right, let's go.
All right, we ask all our guests the same final 4 hot questions. So David, number 1, what is one book you'd recommend to someone wanting to know more about real estate investing?
So obviously a lot of people have read this book, but I would say just Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a good, it's a good foundation. A lot of people have misconceptions on the very fundamentals of real estate, and then they try to listen to a podcast, and then they're hearing these high level, subject to type deals, and they're hearing about all this stuff. And I think it's easy to get lost in all of that. And so especially if you're starting out, it's really important to just understand the basics of good debt, bad debt, what a liability is, what an asset is. For instance, like a lot of people consider their own home an asset. Well, it's like, well, if you lose your job, you're still liable to make that mortgage payment, assuming you have a loan on it. And so a lot of people don't think of it like that.
Definitely agree. And I mean, a classic, and it's one that I feel like you can read over and over, and you're going to find different tips and tricks. And depending on where you are in your real estate investing journey, like that's a classic book I read literally every year, if not twice a year, because I gain some knowledge out of it. And just a lot of anecdotal things, but also just a lot of like cold hard facts that you have to kind of go back to. So thanks for sharing the classic, I'll say, purple book.
Yeah, no worries.
What is your favorite productivity tip or trick, maybe a tool or some sort of time saver or an app that really helps your business and your investing move forward?
I would say as a productivity tip to stay productive, it really might almost depend a lot more on who around you have. If you have a lot of productive people around you and they're making deals and they're telling you about like, oh, I'm looking at this property tomorrow and I'm going to see if I can do this.
You're going to do something
that's
yourself.
That's going to make you go home and be like, oh, I need to look at some stuff. And that's really probably where I get most of my productivity from. And it's just, I learned to have fun in those conversations, and then,
sure.
And then maybe in the next conversation, I can come to them and be like, oh, I was looking at this, or I had this idea. And so,
absolutely.
I think it's a bit more external.
No, I like that. What's your biggest real estate mistake or failure, and what did you learn from that experience?
So I have a few, but I would say my biggest mistake was probably the Glendale property I bought. I rental arbitrage it, and it's going well now. It's, cash flowing. I'm not losing money on it. But that said, when I got into it, if people have been following the market, they know that at least here in the Phoenix area, values and activity really slowed down after 2022, like May of 2022. Well, I contracted in May and then closed in June. So, I bought at probably the worst time I possibly could have bought at. I put 20% down. I did it all correct, 20% down. I did all the remodel with, my own cash. And that is part of why I still have the deal. I didn't have any hard money. I didn't have hard money to do the renovation. And so that part saved me, but my return on dollars invested is by far the worst that I've had to date. And, it just, you just have to roll with it, not think about it too much. You only lose if you have to sell, in my eyes. And, if you're trying to, buy deals, I think it's better to just be consistent. I almost think of it as like a lot of people have heard of dollar cost averaging, and like the S&P 500. It's like, oh, you buy every week, and that you buy the lows and you buy the highs. Well, I see it as if you're buying, let's say, a piece of real estate each year. It's like, well, that year, I didn't buy a great deal, or at least it wasn't great right off the bat.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the deals I bought in prior years, those did really well. And
sure.
But, I think for me, it was just
when the market's like this, it's hard to buy bad, right?
Right,
it's
right.
Like,
yeah.
But you did what you're supposed to do is you penciled it and you're still cash flowing. Like, that's not a bad deal.
So I
right?
considered worst case scenario, and, and I'm able to keep it. I think that's the important
That's what's
lesson
key,
there.
because most people, they're writing it that they can hit this home run on every deal. And when you don't hit that home run and it's only a double, you're doomed, right?
Right.
Where to your point, it's like, hey, I'm making money. I could make a little bit of money, but it's also, in my opinion, you're only going to make more money. Like, you're in fixed rate. You put 20% down. Your next lease will be more than this lease. Like, you're going to be doing better. All right. And finally, David, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
One thing I'd like to be remembered for is just in my own family, community, whatever that looks like, the people around me, that if I can, maybe not like officially mentor people or anything like that, but, just to be able to help out those around me, investing, and whether that's, and, everyone's different, whether that's convincing them to, pay down credit cards and just start investing in a 401k, or, if they're interested in real estate, because real estate's not for everyone, but if they're interested in that, to be able to help them on their values, with my specialty in appraising.
Sure.
So if I could be remembered for just someone who, gave back, at least with knowledge or time, something like that, I think that would be a pretty good goal.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's what my business is all about, right? It's what this podcast is all about, is just helping other people and lifting them up, trying to share some of these resources and things of that nature with the audience. And so I know you're always one person I like to reach out to whenever I'm comping a property or I have questions or I'm struggling with something. So, the best place for the Hot REI community to connect with David, I'll drop his phone number and his email in the show notes, and definitely feel free to reach out to David. He's a wonderful resource. And we didn't talk so much about residential appraising this time, but David, we'll have you on again, and maybe we'll run through some appraisals so we can just help people out there on how does an appraiser appraise properties, and so that we can all get a little bit better at appraising ourselves. Thank you again today for joining me. It was fun, and I'm sure the audience is going to learn a lot about rental arbitrage on the other side, from the investor standpoint that actually owns the asset. What are some pros? What are some negatives? What are some of those ways to be able to get a little bit more money out of maybe one of your long-term rentals or one of your assets, and another way to think about things. So thank you very much for shedding light on that. And to the audience, thank you for tuning in today, and commit to take action today to move your investing forward. Take care, and God bless.
Thank you for listening to the Hot Real Estate Investing Podcast. Check out our website, hotrei.com, for additional content and resources. And please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review so we can continue to bring even more value to others through real estate investing.